So before I begin this section's topic, I want to talk about the defining the character set in our HTML file, because we might actually be needing that in our JavaScript. Because remember last time I said the vertical tab is not defined in my version of JavaScript in my browser. So, and this message we keep getting this whole series in Firefox anyway. We're going to get rid of that. So we're going to get rid of that by typing in the following. So I copied it from before. So it's called meta. You're going to go to your HTML file and type in meta. And you often, well, in Sublime Text, you get it automatically. So you're going to type meta. And you press enter. And if you press control space, if you don't get that box you just saw, it'll automatically come back UTF-8. This is the most standard character set, and basically it got rid of that dialog, and vertical tab is still not defined, but now we have some sort of character set, the set of characters for JavaScript to read from, so it can accept pretty much, with UTF-8, pretty much all kinds of characters. So let's get into the actual topic I want to talk about today, in this tutorial. So in this tutorial, I just want to talk about what strings are, essentially. So I think I talked about in the chapter on loops and the chapter on arrays that strings are often treated as arrays of characters. That's why we can have a for loop. So we're going to have a for loop, and we're going to have str, for example. It's going to be var str equals string test. Essentially, a string can be treated as an array of characters. So if we did this, str equals I, you get basically all the characters divided out. So like this, a string can be treated as an array of characters. However, in JavaScript, pretty much everything, even arrays and strings are objects themselves. They have some set of properties like length, and they have a set of functions, which we'll also be seeing in this chapter as well. And all these functions and properties are built into these objects, which are sort of units of data. A string is a unit of data. It contains characters, it contains a length, and it might contain, I don't know, character format or something like that. So yeah, so strings in JavaScript are objects. And like objects, which we'll see in one of the upcoming chapters, we can create a string in the following way. So we have string obj for object. We use the new operator, which creates an object, and you're going to say string. And inside this parentheses, we're going to say, okay, this is a string object. So what I did here, I'll be talking about in the next chapter as well, about objects, is we're basically saying, okay, we're making a new object. It's a string object, which is provided by JavaScript built in, and its contents are going to be, its initial contents are going to be, this is a string object. This is the equivalent of just writing, this is a string object. However, in some cases, this might be considered a primitive data type, and this would be considered an object, which is a different data type in JavaScript. So maybe that confused you a little, but don't worry, they pretty much have the same functionality as regular strings, just like as you would write it in a just by itself with the parentheses, as you would here. So we're going to look at some sort of operations with looking at the differences between a string object and a string primitive type. So to do that, we're going to see this var string test equals, hello. Let's do something different this time. Buenos dias. Just like that. And we're going to have another string, var string test equals hello So we're gonna do a console log, and we're gonna display the comparison between them. I should do string test1 and string test2. String test1 and string test2. String test1. No, it's not str. str test1. Let's set our equal to str test2. So here I just want to look at how we would compare strings, because like with numbers, it compares the actual values, like if a number is greater or smaller than another number. So let's see what we get here. We got false here because, well, string 2 is, but it should be, right? It should be true because str test is smaller than str test1. But it gives us some weird results. So let's just try tweaking this, playing with this around under a little. So as you can see, all these operators give us false because for some reason, probably maybe due to the ASCII values. But as you can see here, string test is greater than string test2 is greater than string test1 for some reason, even though it's shorter and it contains less characters. It's quite strange how strings work in JavaScript, as you can see. So, but if we do equal, this just basically compares whether the strings are equal to each other or not. And this is probably the most often one you'll see used because it makes the most like sensible results. Like as you can see, it obviously returns false, and for some reason this returns true. Like string 2, the second string is not greater, it's not bigger than this string, right? And they're certainly not equal. So, and it gives like opposite results as you saw. So if this was less, if this returns false, yet greater than returns true. So, so basically we're going to be using this a lot. You're going to be using this a lot in your programming life in JavaScript. For example, if you're checking some sort of input to be equal to like yes, y, no, and so, or whatever, and so on, to match up certain things. And we also have this third one, is strict equality operator, 3 equal signs. This checks whether the value is, it checks if the value is equal to, if the left value is equal to the right value, and if they are the same type. So let me set these equal to each other. This is going to return true. Actually, I didn't save it, did I? Okay, this is it. Oh, that's because they don't have exclamation points. Here we go. So this returns true, and this returns true. So what's the point of using this operator right here, this 3 equal signs? Well, let's have a situation where we have an object string, and it's going to have the same value. Let's check the first variant, you get true. However, when we do the following, 3 equal signs, we get false. And we get false because, well, these two are not the same objects. And remember, this, like I said, creates a new object that is a string. And this does the same thing as well. So they're two separate entities. They have the same values inside, but they're two separate entities altogether. And this is the essence of what objects are. They're different instances of well, in JavaScript there aren't specific classes, but this is an instance of an object type of some sort. And we'll be talking about those later in the next chapter, but I just want to show you how strings work in JavaScript. They're basically objects. They're sequences of characters, but they're also objects. So let's also try making let's strictly try making 2 new objects. So string So now we have similar looking objects, right? So let's try to check if they're equal to each other in value. You get false. So you think you'd get true, right? Well, in this case, these are we're strictly defining two different objects, two different string objects. So that's basically a difference between defining new string and just directly writing hello like this. So instead of writing strictly defining a string like this with hello as the contents, we're defining hello directly. So this can be considered both an object and a primitive type, where this turns out to be true. However, the strict equality operator turns out false between them. And when we have two different objects, with the same value, you'll always get false. So you got to be careful when working with strings in JavaScript. You got to make sure whatever your application is doing, you got to make sure when you're creating an object that is a string like this, or when you're just creating a string directly. Oftentimes, I'll just use directly making a string because I'll need to work with something like this more directly instead of an object of it. Although it's all up to you. It depends on how you like programming. This is more of the object-oriented approach, making more objects, but this way is just fine. So they're both, in essence, they have the same effect. However, if you have a situation where you're comparing the two to each other, you'll run into problems. So that's something you got to be very careful with. So, excuse me. So since strings are objects, we have a bunch of properties and methods or functions available to us stored in the objects provided to us by JavaScript. Don't worry if you don't understand how that is. I'll be explaining that in a whole chapter when we talk about objects, and we'll be explaining functions in another chapter too. So don't worry about that. This chapter is just meant to prepare you for those chapters and what's in store for us. So, if you remember, let's talk about the properties now of strings. If you remember, we just simply have length of a string. That's the property we have available to us. It just returns how many characters there are in the string. And this is used when we're working with the string in iterative code, such as in a loop. So here we have 6 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And remember, if we're working with an array, the indexes are the same as if we're working with an array, as you saw in the beginning of this video. So I think with that, I'll stop here and I'll leave the functions for the next video. So we hope to see you then.